Why are you laughing?
You missed something.
The Veth interrogator had broken 17 sentient species in this room. He knew this because he had counted them. 17 species, 41 individual subjects. The chamber had been engineered over 2 centuries of careful, methodical research into neurological pain architecture. What frequencies caused psychological collapse? What chemical compounds dissolved mental resistance? What combinations of sensory input forced any sapient creature into a state of total cooperative surrender? The chamber had never failed. Until now. The human was laughing. Not the desperate, fractured laughter of a mind breaking apart. Not the hollow sound of someone who had already surrendered to madness. This was something worse, something the interrogator's training had not prepared him for. It was genuine. The sound bounced off the smooth obsidian walls of Chamber 7, light and careless, as though the human found the whole situation mildly amusing rather than existentially catastrophic. The resonance dampeners, designed to amplify psychological isolation, seemed instead to amplify the laughter until it filled every corner of the room. The interrogator, whose name was Grethva of the second house, stood very still. He had 4 eyes, and he was using all of them. The human, male, approximately 32 years by Terran reckoning, wearing the torn gray uniform of a galactic consortium diplomatic liaison, was suspended in the center of the chamber by a harness of magnetic field anchors. Both arms extended, head slightly bowed. The neural feedback crown sat on his temples, feeding precisely calibrated pain signals directly into his nervous system. The crown had been set to level 6. Level 4 had caused a Keth warrior, a species whose pain tolerance was considered the biological standard for suffering endurance, to beg within 11 minutes. The human had been at level 6 for 37 minutes, and he was laughing. Grethva crossed the chamber floor slowly, his 4-fingered hands clasped behind his back. He stopped 2 meters from the human and studied the face. The eyes were watering, the jaw muscles were tight. Clearly the signals were reaching the nervous system. Clearly the pain was registering. But there was something underneath the pain, something running parallel to it that Grethva could not locate in any of his reference files. "You find this amusing," Grethva said. It was not a question. It was a statement of documented, bewildering fact. The human, his name was attached to the file as Marcus Laine. Senior Diplomatic Liaison, 3rd grade, Earth Delegation, raised his head slowly. His eyes were brown, unremarkable by any interstellar standard. "No," Marcus said, and his voice was rougher than it had been 37 minutes ago, but still steady. "I find it instructive." Grethva said nothing. He waited. Marcus let the silence stretch for a moment, which was, Grethva noted, a deliberate rhetorical technique. The human was choosing when to speak. That was not what level 6 subjects did. "Your machine," Marcus said, "is measuring pain response against baseline models from 17 species. I know because I read the Veth Neurological Research Compendium, the unclassified portions, 3 years ago when I was preparing for this assignment." He paused to catch his breath. "You designed this thing to find the frequency that makes a sentient mind want to stop existing. That's elegant, actually." "I mean that." Grethva tilted his head 4 degrees to the left, the Veth equivalent of profound confusion. "The problem," Marcus continued, "is that humans have a biological anomaly you didn't account for. High-intensity pain signals, after approximately 28 minutes of continuous stimulation, trigger a secondary neurotransmitter cascade. Endorphins, adrenaline, and a compound we don't have a good name for, call it the don't die yet chemical. It doesn't eliminate the pain. It just makes the pain feel less important in whatever you're focused on." He smiled. It was a tired smile, but it was real. "And right now I'm focused on something very specific." Grethva stared at him. "What?" he said. "The fact," Marcus said quietly, "that you just told me everything I needed to know." 48 hours earlier, the Convergence Station had been the most politically significant location in the outer spiral. The station orbited the gas giant Kelmarath at a precise gravitational equilibrium point, which was the only reason 17 species had agreed it was a neutral location. It was not beautiful, a utilitarian tangle of pressurized corridors, atmospheric bubbles, and docking spines that had been added by various species over 2 centuries without any aesthetic coordination whatsoever. It looked, as Marcus had once written in a report to Earth's diplomatic corps, like someone dropped a hardware store into orbit, but it worked. The Accord of Kelmerath was 17 years in the making, a trade, defense, and mutual recognition treaty between the Veth hegemony, the Keth Collective, the Pra-Commonwealth, and 11 smaller polities that collectively controlled resource access to 2/3 of the outer spiral. Earth had been invited to observe, not to participate. Humanity was too new, too small, too biologically fragile, and too technologically underpowered to be considered a meaningful party. They were there, as Ambassador Chen had privately described it, to get used to the smell of the room before anyone would consider letting us sit at the table. Marcus had been assigned to cultural liaison work, translating not language, which the universal transceivers handled, but context. Why the Veth never made direct eye contact during agreements. Why the Keth negotiators kept arriving late. Why the Preah delegation insisted on changing the lighting temperature every 6 hours. He was, by his own description, a professional explainer of manners. He was not a soldier. He was not an intelligence operative. He was not a weapons specialist. He was 5 feet 11 inches tall, slightly underweight for his frame, and had a reputation among the alien delegations as the human who could be trusted to stay quiet during important moments. He had a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Diplomat" on it. He brought it to meetings. The attack came at 0300 station time, when most of the non-nocturnal species were in sleep cycles. It was not a large attack. It was a precise 1-3 simultaneous events, a power surge that isolated the Preah delegation's atmospheric bubble, an encrypted signal that locked down the Keth negotiators' communication arrays, and a small group of armed figures in Veth security uniforms who moved through Corridor 7 with practiced efficiency. Their target was not a delegate. It was Marcus Laine. He had been awake. This was, as it turned out, relevant. The reason Marcus had been awake at 0300 was not heroism, it was insomnia. He had always been a bad sleeper, something that had been mildly inconvenient on Earth, and had become, in alien environments with their strange pressure variations and unfamiliar atmospheric compositions, a near-constant condition. He averaged 4 hours of sleep per station night, and he spent the remaining hours doing what he had always done with wakeful darkness, thinking, reading, and cataloging things that seemed wrong. For 3 days before the attack, several things had seemed wrong. The Veth security rotation had changed twice without announced reason. The PRA delegation's junior attaché had been meeting privately with a Veth communications officer, not unusual in itself, except that the junior attaché was the only PRA delegate who had consistently opposed the Accord's resource-sharing provisions, and someone had accessed the station's structural schematics from a terminal in a corridor that had no legitimate reason to require that information. Marcus had noted all of this in a personal log. He had not reported it officially because he had no proof, and because a junior-grade diplomatic liaison submitting a security report based on pattern recognition and a bad feeling would have been politely redirected to the station's psychological support staff. So he prepared instead. This was, he would later reflect, the most human thing he had ever done. Not the preparation itself. Every species prepared for threats. But the specific form his preparation took. Low resource, improvised, built entirely from things that were not weapons and would not be identified as weapons. When the 3 figures in Veth security uniforms came through the door of his quarters, they found him standing in the center of the room, fully dressed, with his coffee mug on the desk beside him. "Marcus Laine," the lead figure said. "You will come with us." "Of course," Marcus said. He picked up the coffee mug. One of the figures moved to take it from him. "It's just a mug," Marcus said pleasantly. "It helps me think." They let him keep it. This was, as it turned out, their only significant mistake. The interrogation had been running for 37 minutes when Grethva realized he had a serious professional problem. He had expected many things from the human. Resistance, which could be overcome. Defiance, which the machine dissolved. Silence, which was merely a delay. Even negotiation. Several subjects had tried to bargain their way through level 6, offering information, resources, political intelligence. He had not expected a lecture on neuroscience. More precisely, he had not expected to be learning something. Grethva was not a stupid being. He had served the Second House for 18 years, had conducted interrogations on behalf of Veth intelligence interests across 6 systems, and had personally contributed to 3 significant political outcomes that the history books would eventually discuss without ever mentioning his name. He understood leverage. He understood pressure. He understood the architecture of breaking. He did not understand what was happening in Chamber 7. The human was not breaking. The human was cataloging. Between fragments of laughter and controlled breathing exercises, Grethva had never seen a subject perform breathing exercises during level 6 stimulation. Marcus Laine had offered 4 separate observations about the chamber's design, 2 corrections to what he called the standard alien misunderstanding of human pain architecture, and 1 genuinely interesting theory about why the Veth had designed the neural feedback crown to peak at level 8 rather than allowing for a graduated approach. "You're afraid of dragging it out," Marcus had said, 20 minutes in. "That's why you jump to high intensity, because extended low-level interrogation creates bonding effects between interrogator and subject, and bonding is complicated for Veth Second House culture. It introduces variables you don't like." Grethva had said nothing, but he had been listening. Now, standing in front of the human, he processed the most recent statement. "You just told me everything I needed to know." "Explain," Grethva said. "You used Chamber 7, Marcus said. "Not Chamber 3, not Chamber 11, 7. I know the station layout. Chamber 7 is adjacent to the Veth delegation's primary communication hub, which means either you chose it for convenience, which is operationally sloppy, or you chose it because you needed me close to something." He breathed carefully. "Also, you've been checking that wall." He nodded toward the eastern panel. "Every 4 minutes, there's something behind it that you're monitoring." Grethva did not check the wall, but he became very still. "You're not interrogating me," Marcus said. "You're warehousing me. You need me in this specific room for a specific duration. The interrogation is cover." He tilted his head. "For what?" The silence in the chamber was different now. Grethva crossed to the control panel and reduced the neural feedback to level 2, not from mercy, but because a subject operating at level 6 might become neurologically unreliable, and he needed to think clearly about what Marcus Laine had just said. This was, of course, exactly what Marcus had wanted. At 0400 station time, the Accord of Kelmarith nearly died. Not from the power surge, which had been restored. Not from the communications lockdown, which the Keth technical staff had broken within 40 minutes. Not from the abduction of a junior human liaison, which the station's security office had categorized as a secondary incident. The real attack was a document, specifically a perfectly forged record of a secret agreement between Earth's diplomatic delegation and the Pra Commonwealth, allegedly signed 3 months before the Accord negotiations began, in which humanity agreed to provide the Pra with exclusive navigation route data through Earth-explored space in exchange for Pra support for human membership in the Accord, cutting out the Veth and Keth entirely. The document was extraordinarily good. The metadata was clean, the linguistic patterns matched Ambassador Chen's documented communication style, and the encryption signature used a key architecture that was consistent with Earth's diplomatic protocols. It had been transmitted simultaneously to the Veth Hegemony's senior delegate, the Keth Collective's lead negotiator, and 11 of the smaller polities representatives at 0358 station time. By 4010, the Keth negotiators had formally suspended their participation in the Accord. By 420, the Veth senior delegate had issued a statement calling for an emergency review of all Earth access credentials. By 430, the Accord of Kelmarath, 17 years of careful, grinding diplomatic work, was effectively dead. And in Chamber 7, Grethva received a message on his personal communicator that read, "Phase complete. Dispose of the asset and depart on schedule." He looked at the human. Marcus Laine was looking at the eastern wall panel. "There it is," Marcus said quietly. "You're going to kill me now," Marcus said. It was not a question. "Yes," Grethva said. He found unexpectedly that he preferred honesty in this moment. Before you do, Marcus said, I want to tell you something, not to beg for my life. I want to tell you because you're intelligent and because what's about to happen will be better if someone on your side understands it. Grethva said nothing, but he did not move toward the control panel. The document you just transmitted, the one framing Earth for a secret deal with the Pariah, it's already being analyzed by Ambassador Chen's staff. They've been awake since early 300 because I sent them a wake-up protocol before your people came through my door. A pause. The protocol was in my coffee mug. Grethva looked at the mug on the floor where the guards had placed it. The handle of the mug contains a short-range transmitter. 3 signals. The first signal, sent when I picked it up, activated a dormant recording system I'd installed in my quarters 11 days ago. The second signal, sent when your guard grabbed my arm in Corridor 4, transmitted a location ping to the Earth delegation's emergency channel. And the third signal, Marcus smiled, I sent about 4 minutes after we entered this chamber. It activated a data burst protocol I'd embedded in the station's civilian communication relay 48 hours ago. What data? Grethva said. The structural schematics access you made 6 days ago. The attache's meeting logs with your communications officer. I copied them. The power surge pattern, which matches a technique documented in Veth military engineering archives from the Keth border conflict 19 years ago. And my personal log of 17 observed anomalies, time-stamped and filed to an Earth diplomatic server with a 48-hour automatic publication delay. Marcus looked at him directly. That delay expired 9 minutes ago. Grethva was very still. Everything your house needed this operation to remain secret is now available to 17 diplomatic delegations, 2 independent news services, and the Galactic Consortium's security oversight body. Marcus's voice was calm, almost gentle. Killing me doesn't help you anymore. Grethva walked to the far wall and stood with his back to the human for a long moment. He was not panicking. He was calculating. This was what made him, Marcus knew, the most dangerous version of this problem. A panicking Veth operative might make errors. A calculating one would find the fastest path to an acceptable outcome. You cannot verify publication, Grethva said finally. No, Marcus agreed, neither can you. If I release you, you become a witness. Yes, if I don't release you. He still can't unring the bell. The data is out. Marcus waited. But there's a third option you haven't considered. Grethva turned. Your second house, Marcus said. Not first. Second house loses significant political standing if this operation is exposed as a hegemony-sanctioned action. But if it's exposed as a rogue operation by a junior operative acting against House leadership's wishes, he let it hang. You're suggesting I surrender myself, Grethva said. I'm suggesting you become the story instead of the footnote. The Veth operative who recognized the operation had gone wrong and chose to cooperate with consortium security rather than compounding the damage. That's not a career-ending story. Depending on how it's told, it might be the opposite. Grethva studied him for a very long time. You prepared for this, he said, before you were taken. You prepared for this specific conversation. I prepared for the version of this conversation where I'd been at level 6 stimulation for 40 minutes and needed to make a complex argument clearly, Marcus said. Honestly, you ran it pretty much according to my second worst-case scenario. What was the worst case? Level 8. A pause. Would you have laughed at level 8? Grethva asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I don't know, he said. I've never been to level 8. What happened in the next 6 hours would be analyzed by Galactic Consortium intelligence services for years. Grethva released Marcus from the magnetic harness at 0447 station time. He retained his weapon. This was not trust. It was the beginning of a negotiation. But he opened the chamber door and allowed Marcus to sit on the floor rather than remain suspended. Marcus sat with his back against the wall and his coffee mug between his palms and talked. Not about the immediate situation, about the document, the forged Prey-Earth agreement, about who had ordered the forgery, what the strategic objective had been, and why the operation's timing had been linked to the Accord rather than the alternative Veth interests Marcus had initially suspected. This was the part that Grethva had not been told. He had been told that the objective was to destabilize the Accord by making Earth appear to have violated its neutral party status. He had not been told that the actual beneficiary of a collapsed accord was not the Veth's second house. It was a third party that had been quietly funding house political activities for 11 months. The Wreath Consortium, Marcus said. Not a species, a corporate entity. They've been buying political influence in 5 Agevany houses for almost a year. They need the Accord to fail because the Accord's resource-sharing provisions would undercut their monopoly on outer spiral navigation data. Grethva said nothing, but his breathing had changed. You didn't know, Marcus said. I was told the operation served hegemony interests. It served Reth interests. Your house was used. Marcus looked at him. That's the story you can tell. That's the story that gets you out of this with something intact. You knew about the Reth Consortium before tonight, Grethva said. How long? 11 days, Marcus said. Why didn't you? I had no proof of their involvement. I had pattern recognition and a bad feeling. Marcus turned the coffee mug in his hands. So I built a trap that would make them generate their own evidence. The silence lasted a long time. The data burst, Grethva said slowly. It didn't just contain what you documented. It contained the transmission logs from tonight, the timing, the content, including the message I received telling me to dispose of you. The message that came from a Reth-controlled communication node, Marcus said. Yes. Grethva sat down on the floor, across from Marcus Laine. This was not something Veth's second house interrogators did. You allowed yourself to be taken, Grethva said. I allowed myself to be taken to this specific room, where I knew the evidence I needed would be generated automatically by the operation running its course. Marcus rubbed his temples carefully. The transmitter in the mug recorded everything since ERDI 300, every word, including yours, every signal from that eastern panel, every message you received. You experienced level 6 stimulation for 37 minutes as part of a documentation strategy. I mean, Marcus said, I wouldn't call it comfortable. By 900, the consortium's security oversight body had 3 things. Marcus Laine's documented evidence file, published automatically at 421, Grethva's formal testimony recorded beginning at 05112, and a direct communication trail connecting the forged document's creation to a Reth Consortium secure server, a trail that had been deliberately left by someone inside the Reth organization who, it emerged, had been contacted 3 weeks earlier by an Earth diplomatic aide who had quietly let it be known that any evidence of Reth involvement in Accord sabotage would be received with significant interest by the right parties. The aide in question was Marcus Laine. The Accord did not die. It was suspended for 72 hours while the security oversight body completed its preliminary investigation. At the end of those 72 hours, the forged Earth PRA document was formally declared fraudulent. The Keth collective suspension was withdrawn. The Veth hegemony's 3 most senior second house political figures resigned their positions in what was described in official statements as a response to personal health circumstances. The Reth Consortium's navigation monopoly, which had been worth approximately 1.4 trillion consortium credits, was placed under immediate regulatory review. The Accord of Kelmarath was signed 14 days later. Earth was still not a party to it, but for the first time, Earth was on the agenda. 3 days after the crisis, Grethva requested a private meeting with Marcus Laine. This required, on both sides, a certain tolerance for awkwardness. They met in a small observation room on the station's northern spoke, a bubble of transparent alloy that looked directly into the amber-swirled face of Kelmarath. The gas giant was enormous and quiet and completely indifferent to the political events that had occurred in its orbit. Grethva brought nothing. Marcus brought coffee. They sat for a while without talking, which suited both of them. I submitted my testimony to consortium security, Grethva said finally. I told them I was deceived by the operation's framing and chose to cooperate when I understood the actual situation. I know, Marcus said. I reviewed the transcript. The security oversight body has classified my full cooperation as a mitigating factor. A pause. I will likely face a reduced sanction, significant but not career-ending. That's good. Grethva looked at the gas giant. You included language in your own witness statement characterizing my decision to cooperate as genuine and independently motivated. Because it was, Marcus said. It was motivated by self-preservation. So is most courage, Marcus said. That doesn't make it less real. Grethva was quiet for a moment. I want to ask you something, he said. All right. At level 6, when you were laughing. He paused, and the pause had the quality of something that had been sitting in his mind for 3 days. Was any part of that calculated? Or was it both? Marcus said. I knew that an unexpected reaction would force you to engage, rather than simply run the protocol to completion. I knew that if I could keep you curious, I could keep myself alive long enough for the rest of the plan to work. He looked at his coffee. But I also laughed because, and this is harder to explain, because the situation was genuinely absurd. I had planned for something like this for 11 days. I had built the best trap I could with a coffee mug and a maintenance bot and a borrowed access code. And it was all running exactly the way I'd hoped, which meant I was suspended in the air, having signals fed directly into my nervous system, which was... He paused. You know that feeling when you've been carrying something heavy for so long that when it finally gets resolved, you laugh even if the resolution is painful. Grethva considered this. No, he said honestly. Humans do that, Marcus said. A lot. The gas giant turned slowly below them, indifferent and vast. I have studied 47 species in the course of my career, Grethva said. Before this assignment, I would have categorized humans among the least threatening to any professional I might encounter, technologically limited, biologically fragile, politically peripheral, brief lifespans, known for emotional unpredictability. He paused. I would have been incorrect. We're still technologically limited, Marcus said, and politically peripheral, and our lifespans are genuinely short by galactic standards. And yet, Marcus agreed. Grethva looked at him. What made you believe, when you began planning 11 days ago, that a diplomat with a modified coffee mug could dismantle a Veth consortium operation backed by Veth House political power? Marcus thought about this seriously, because it was a serious question, and Grethva deserved a real answer. I didn't believe I could dismantle it, he said. I believed I could document it and survive long enough to ensure the documentation reached the right people and trust that documented truth, given to enough parties simultaneously, is harder to suppress than any single political operation. He turned the mug in his hands. I also believed that whoever ran the operation would underestimate me. Because everyone does. Because humans are small and new and politically marginal, and our technology looks primitive and our lifespans are short, and we don't even have proper combat biology. He smiled slightly. We look like something you don't need to worry about carefully, and that's the best possible environment for paranoid preparation. Grethva said nothing for a long moment. You were afraid, he said. At level 6, extremely, Marcus said, but you laughed. The fear and the laughter were the same thing, Marcus said. That's the part you couldn't find in your reference files. He looked at the gas giant. We've been afraid for our entire evolutionary history. Afraid of predators, afraid of darkness, afraid of each other. Every biological advantage a human has, the endorphins, the adrenaline cascade, the capacity for improvisation under pressure, all of it came from being the species that was always afraid and never stopped anyway. He set the coffee mug on a ledge between them. Your torture chamber was built on the assumption that pain and fear lead to surrender. For most species, that's probably true. For humans, he shrugged. Pain and fear are familiar. We've been friends with them for 200,000 years. We know how they work. We know what they're trying to tell us. And sometimes, when things are bad enough and the plan is running and the trap is set and there is nothing left to do but endure. He looked at Grethva. Sometimes we laugh, not because we're not afraid, because we know what comes after the fear. The formal invitation arrived on Marcus Laine's desk 14 days after the Accord signing. It was not an invitation to join the Accord. Earth was still not ready for that, and more importantly, the Accord signatories were not yet ready to trust that Earth's presence would not complicate the careful balance they'd achieved. That would take years, perhaps decades. The invitation was for something smaller and considerably more significant. It was an invitation to attend, as a recognized party, the first session of the newly formed Consortium Intelligence Oversight Committee, a body created specifically as a result of the Kelmarth incident, tasked with investigating the infiltration of political processes by entities like the Reth Consortium. Earth had one seat. Marcus's name was attached to the seat. Ambassador Chen called it a modest victory with enormous implications. Marcus called it a start. He wrote the acceptance on diplomatic stationery, sealed it with proper ceremony, and sent it through the correct channels. Then he made a cup of coffee, carried it to the window of his quarters, and looked at the stars. The outer spiral was 400 light-years of complex politics, alien biology, historical grievances, corporate interests, and 17 species who were still deciding whether humanity was worth the trouble of knowing. 400 light-years. Marcus sipped his coffee. He had time. In the 3 years Marcus Laine spent preparing a report for Earth's diplomatic corps on the lessons of Kelmara Station, the section most frequently cited by other diplomats was not the tactical analysis of the Reth Consortium's operation, nor the forensic breakdown of the forged document, nor the legal precedent established by the Consortium Oversight Committee. It was a single paragraph near the end of the report's conclusion. Humanity's consistent underestimation by galactic civilization is not a problem to be solved. It is a resource to be managed. Every species that dismisses us as peripheral, fragile, or primitive makes the same miscalculation. They confuse our position for our capability. They see the edge of the room and assume we are not watching the center. They see our biology and assume we have not already accounted for its limitations. They see our fear and assume it means we will stop. Humanity did not survive 200,000 years of darkness, predation, climate, plague, and each other by being the strongest species on our planet. We survived by being the species that, when everything was against us and the situation was genuinely hopeless, made a plan anyway. The galaxy's most powerful civilizations built their strength over millennia of safety and abundance. Humans built ours in the dark, afraid, and running out of time. That is not a weakness. That is the oldest advantage in the universe.